Hello and welcome to another LeetCode problem. Today we're going to be continuing on with the JavaScript 30-day challenge, and we're going to be doing group by. So in this problem, you need to write code that enhances all arrays such that you can call array.groupBy with a function method on an array, and it will return a group version of the array. A grouped array is an object where each key is the output fnri, and each value is the array containing all items in the original array with that key. The provided callback function will accept an item, and it will return a string. And the order of each value should be the order that the item appears in the array. Any order of keys is acceptable, and we don't want to use group by function. So let's go through this example. So in the first function, we are given an array. Right? So we're given an array with 3 objects, and the objects are ID 1, and then we have another object, so ID 1, and then ID. So in these things in the array, notice they can be anything. They can be objects, they can be arrays, they can be primitive types, they can be whatever. But that's not really going to matter. This problem is actually pretty straightforward. So essentially, we need to call fn on all these. So let's take a look what this function actually does. So this function will just return the ID of the item. So for like this, it will return 1. For this, it will return 1. And for this, it will return 2. Right. And so essentially all we need to do is we need to have some kind of output object where we have the fields it will return. So remember, this will return 1, this will return 1, this will return 2. And so for our output object, we simply need to put these objects into an array of their output field. So we're going to have 1, and it's going to have this object here. So we're just going to copy it in here, over here. And it's also going to have this object here, because these two objects will return the value 1, right? So we're going to put those in here, and this is going to be an array. So it's going to be an array of these two objects. And for the field 2, this should actually, or 2 here, we're going to have one more array, and it's going to take this right here. So we're going to copy that in to here. And so it's going to be like that, where the array's keys are going to be the value that the function is returning, and then the value is the actual object that the function was called upon, and they need to be in the right order. Right, let's take a look at example 2. So here we have another array of 3 arrays now. So we have 3 arrays. Let's just draw those out. So 1, 2, 3. So array of 3 arrays. And we have 1, 3, 5. And we have 1, 5, 9. And so in our return object, let's see what that's supposed to look like. So we have this return object here. And we make it like this if we wanted to. Okay. So what does this function do in this? It simply returns the first item in the list, right? So if a function is called on this, it will return the first item. So that'll be 1, and it will convert it into a string. So this will be 1. This will be 1. So all of these actually return 1, meaning all of these return 1. So for the key 1 in our return object, it's going to have all 3 of these. So we can actually just copy that in. So we're going to have a key 1, and then we're going to have an array of all of these things. Let's make it a little smaller so it can fit. There we go. So it'll be an array of all of these things. So get rid of that. There we go. Because they all return 1, right? Pretty straightforward. Okay, now let's look at our final example. And let's kind of try to figure out what we need to be doing here. So we have 10 numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we have 10 numbers, and what is this function doing now? It's saying return true if the number is greater than 5, and return false if not, essentially. So we're going to have 2 output fields, right? We're going to have a true and a false field. So let's do that. So we have this return object, so we have a true field. And it's going to have some stuff, and we're going to have a false field. And so what's going to be in our true and false? Well, all of these are going to return false, right? False. And all of these are going to return true because we're simply just asking, is the number greater than 5? So for the true, it's going to be 6. Okay, let's get rid of this. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And for the false, it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now that we've seen enough of these, let's actually figure out like what's our logic. Let's just write down our steps here. Okay, so let's write down our steps. Let's write them in another color and try to figure out like what the hell's going on actually, right? So let's write it in red maybe. Okay. So step 1, what do we need to do? We need to create an empty object, right? Because this object will be returned, right? Like this object will be empty and it will be returned. Step 2, what do we need to do for step 2? We need to loop through all values in the input array, right? So we're just going to be going one by one and calling the function on it, and call fn on them. So we're gonna call function on them, and then what's our output going to be? Our output is actually going to be the key, right? So the outputs are going to be the keys. So like when this function returns, this is a key, this is a key, and so we're going to write that in as well. So outputs will be keys in return object. Now we have two cases. So A, if key isn't in the object, let's add it in with value being empty array. Right? So essentially, like let's say we go through these and we go through one returns false. Then we check our object. Is there actually a false key? There's not. So if there is no false key in our object, we can just have, this is an object, we can just add a false key before we insert the value, and we can just make the value equal to an empty array. And then if there is a false key, we're simply going to be pushing, right? So case B, if the key exists, let's add the array value into its values, right? So like, how would this look? Let's just actually go through this example, right? So let's have our return object, and let's go through these values just to demonstrate. So we're going to start with value 1. We're going to call fn on it. We're going to get false because remember what our function does is our function returns true if the value is greater than 5. Otherwise false. So it's going to return false. Now we need to check, does our object have a false? No, it does not. So we need to add a false. Right, so we need to add a false key. Let's do that. So false. And we're going to initialize it to an empty array. Then we're going to need to actually put in the value, right? So what is the value here? The value, and remember the values are the values from the original array. It's the inputs from the original array into the function. So we're going to put a 1 here. Now we're going to go to the 2, and we're going to get a false again. And we're going to say, is there a false key in there? Yes, it is. So let's add a 2. Now for the 3, is a false key in there? Yes, it is. Let's append the 3. For the 4, is it in there? Yes, it is. Append the 4. And the 5 as well, right? So once we're at the 6, we need to check. We're going to call function on it again. We're going to get true. Is true in our object? No, it's not. So we need to add a true key with an empty array, right? So we can be appending to it. And then we're gonna take this value. We're gonna put it in there, right? So we're gonna put the 6 in there. Now for 7, it's also going to return true. We do have a true, so let's put it in. For 8, it's going to return true. Let's put it in. For 9, it's going to return true. Let's put it in. And for 10, it's going to return true. Let's put it in. And then finally, once we're done going through the array, we just simply return this entire object. And so that's our steps. So if the key exists, let's add the value, and then finally, right? So finally here, maybe return object. Okay, that's pretty much all it's going to be. And now let's actually write the code. So pretty straightforward, right? So we create an empty object. So let's just say const object. Now we need to go through all of the values in the array. So how do we go through the values using the this keyword here? So remember, we're in the array prototype. So if we want to access the values in the array, this refers to the array we're in. So we could say something like this: for let item of this, where this is the array we're in. What are we doing? What are our steps? So we're gonna save the return value. We're gonna call function on that item, and then we're gonna save that. So we'll just say let result equals function called on item. Now there is some result, and remember this result is actually the key that we're gonna need to check if it's in the object. So if object.has own property result, that means this key is already in there, so we don't need to do anything. But if it's not in there, then remember we need to add the key with an empty array. So we're gonna do that here. So object result, it's actually going to be like this, object result, because we actually need to take the result value to make it a key. So object result equals an empty array. So if this key does not exist, so maybe I can even make that better, so we can just call this key, right? So if object does not have this key, then object key equals empty array. And now, finally, now that we can add things in, let's add it in, right? So object key equals item. So essentially, we're saying this item evaluated to some key. If this key did not exist, let's add in the key with an empty array. And finally, let's add the item from the array into the array. So this should actually not be equals item, right? It should be dot push item. Because the object at the key is actually an empty array, we need to be pushing all of these items to the place where the key is. Okay. And now finally, at the very end, we just need to return the object. And now our stuff should be mapped correctly, right? So for like this, for key 1, our objects will be mapped and so on. Okay, so let's test that. So it does work. Yeah. Okay, so let's go over this one more time just to make it, clear. So we're initializing an empty object. We are going through every single item in the array, every single value in the array, and then we're calling fn on it. We are storing that in key, and then if our object has that key, or if our object doesn't have that key, then we need to say for the value of the key, let's make an empty array, because we're going to be pushing every single item in the array to the corresponding key that it represents, or like that it evaluates to, essentially. And then finally we say, okay, now let's push to the object that key value that's going to be an array. Let's push the item, meaning that when fn was called on that item, it got evaluated to that key. And that's essentially what we're doing. Okay, so that's going to be all for this problem. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.